Every single person on that plane was unconscious. The pilots. The crew. All 489 passengers. Gone in 1 second. The flight attendant grabbed the microphone and screamed for help. Nobody answered. Because nobody was awake. Nobody, except the 16-year-old student sitting alone in seat 12C. She was still awake. She was already thinking. Before you watch full story, comment below from which country are you watching. Don't forget to subscribe for more amazing stories. The sun was going down over Dubai on the evening of March 11, 2016. Terminal 3 of Dubai International Airport was full of noise and movement. The hot desert air that had burned the city all afternoon was slowly cooling down. A light wind moved across the airport grounds. Inside the terminal, thousands of people walked in every direction. Businessmen in nice suits pulled their bags behind them. Families pushed baby strollers full of toys and shopping bags. Tourists took photos of the big screens that showed flight times. Announcements played every 30 seconds in Arabic, English, Hindi, and Mandarin. The big screen at Gate A9 showed one flight. Emirates 616, New York JFK, leaving at 7:55 p.m. The plane was already parked at the gate and was hard to miss. The Airbus A380 was the biggest passenger plane ever made. It had 2 floors, for massive engines, and wings so large they seemed too big for anything that could actually fly. Standing next to it felt like standing next to a tall building. Workers moved around it like ants. Fuel trucks filled its tanks with thousands of gallons. Boarding started at 7:23 p.m. Passengers walked slowly through the bridge that connected the gate to the plane. Businessmen barely looked up from their phones. A young American family with 3 small children tried to carry car seats, backpacks, and a baby bag all at once. A group of Japanese tourists laughed and compared photos. An old couple from Pakistan held hands and walked slowly. An Indian family of 6 talked loudly to each other as they found their seats. Nobody paid any attention to the girl who quietly found her way to seat 12C on the upper floor. She was 16 years old, though she could have passed for 14 in dim light. She was about 5 feet 4, thin, and her body still had that in-between look of someone who had not yet fully grown into a woman. Her skin was a deep rich brown. Her face was striking, high cheekbones, large eyes that seemed to notice everything around her, a straight nose, and lips pressed together in an expression of excitement she was trying very hard to hide. Her natural hair was pulled back in neat braids that ended in a low bun at the back of her head. She wore no makeup, which made her look both younger and more serious at the same time. Her clothes told a clear story. She was smart, careful with money, and did not care much about fashion. Faded blue jeans with a small patch on the left knee. Old white sneakers with tiny drawings in black marker, rockets, a math formula, the NASA symbol. A very large Harvard hoodie that was clearly her favorite piece of clothing. Her backpack was covered in small colorful badges, the Air and Space Museum, the Kennedy Space Center, the Space Shuttle, and a small badge shaped like the A380. She walked through the upper floor of the plane with wide eyes and quiet excitement. Her head kept turning left and right, taking everything in. Before sitting down, she pressed her fingers briefly against the panel above her seat, as if she wanted to feel what it was made of. When she settled into seat 12C and looked out the window at the enormous wing stretching away from the plane, her mouth opened slightly and she let out a long slow breath of wonder. She pulled a notebook from her backpack. The cover was soft and bent from being stuffed into bags so many times. She opened it to a fresh page and started writing right away. First time on A380. The upper floor feels completely different from the outside. The wing looks bigger than I expected from this angle. Having 2 floors must create interesting challenges for the engineers who built this. The plane can fly as high as 43,000 feet. I wonder if they will fly higher tonight because of the strong winds over the Atlantic. The man in 12D glanced at her for 1 second. Teenage girl. Harvard hoodie, like every ambitious high school kid. Excited about the plane. He put on his headphones and was asleep before the door closed. He had absolutely no idea who she was. Her name was Amara Desta. She was 16 years old and a student at Brooklyn Technical High School in New York City, one of the hardest high schools to get into in all of America. She was born in Brooklyn to Ethiopian parents. Her father had left when she was 4 years old. Her mother, Tigist, worked 2 jobs. During the day she worked at a hospital doing office and records work. 3 evenings a week she cleaned offices in a downtown building. They lived in a 2-bedroom apartment in a Brooklyn area called Crown Heights. Money was always tight. Sometimes it was very tight. Flying to other countries was not something their family ever did without a very good reason and a lot of planning. The trip to Addis Ababa to visit her grandmother had taken Tigist 3 full years to save money for. 3 years of putting small amounts aside every month, saying no to things she wanted, and waiting. Amara never once asked for anything extra during those 3 years. She knew exactly what she was being given. 2 weeks with her grandmother in Ethiopia. And now the flight home. Emirates 616. Seat 12C. Upper floor of the world's biggest passenger plane. If you had sat next to Amara on that flight and watched her without her knowing, you would have seen something very different from a normal passenger. She read the safety card that was in the seat pocket in front of her. Not the way most people do, giving it 2 seconds and then putting it away. She read it slowly and completely, turning it over twice and looking carefully at all the pictures. She read the magazine article about the A380 plane the same way a student reads something they will be tested on later. She watched the safety video that played on the screen in front of her with real and genuine interest. When the plane began to move away from the gate, she pressed her face against the window and watched the airport terminal slowly slide away, and the look on her face was pure happiness. She was not pretending any of this. She simply loved planes the way some people love music, or sports, or art. It had started when she was 8 years old and her class took a school trip to the Intrepid Museum on the Hudson River. While other children ran toward the pirate and warship exhibits, Amara stood in front of an old military plane for 20 minutes, reading every sign and asking questions the guide could not answer. On the bus back to school her teacher asked what everyone liked most. The aircraft, Amara said simply. I want to understand how they stay in the air. That was 8 years before this flight. In those 8 years, she had done nothing less than teach herself everything she could find about planes and the science of building them. She read government aviation books and manuals that she downloaded from the internet for free. She watched hundreds of hours of cockpit videos on YouTube, learning how pilots speak on the radio, how they read all their instruments, how they bring a plane down safely for landing. She built small model plane engines in her school's engineering room after class ended, using parts that she bought with birthday money she had saved up. She won the school science fair in 9th grade with a wing design project. In 10th grade she won the New York State Science Fair with a project about improving the emergency oxygen system in planes. The Boeing engineers judging it asked if an adult had helped her. She said no. She had read it all, remembered it all, and understood it all herself. Her memory was unusual even among very smart and gifted students. She could read a technical book or document one time and remember it almost perfectly many months later. Not just the general ideas and main points, the exact numbers, the exact steps in a process, the exact way different parts of a system connected to and affected each other. She had read the full official manual for the A380 plane, all 847 pages of it, as a file she had downloaded over 3 evenings at home. If she needed to, she could picture any page of it in her mind as clearly as if she were holding it in her hands. She also had one more quality she did not yet fully understand. When things went very wrong, her mind became quieter and sharper instead of louder and more confused. Most people freeze in emergencies. Some panic. A very small number find that a real crisis makes their thinking clearer. Amara was in this last group. She did not know it yet. She was about to find out. The flight took off at 8:02 p.m. Dubai time, 7 minutes behind schedule. The A380's 4 massive engines pushed the enormous plane down the runway with a sound like very loud controlled thunder, and then they were in the air. The plane climbed up above the bright shining lights of Dubai far below, above the famous palm-shaped island visible in the dark water, above the empty desert stretching all the way to the dark horizon. Amara pressed her face against the window and watched the whole city get smaller and smaller below her until it was just a field of tiny lights. She ate her dinner, chicken and rice, which was perfectly fine, and talked for a little while with Yuki Tanaka, one of the Emirates flight attendants who was working on the upper floor of the plane. Yuki was 27 years old, Japanese, and had been working for Emirates for 4 years. She had the kind of careful, warm, and professional way about her that Emirates crew were well known for. She noticed the girl in seat 12C because the girl was clearly very excited and was writing notes in a small notebook, and at one point she stopped Yuki to ask her a detailed question about how the plane's air system worked. Yuki had absolutely no idea how to answer it. "I only know how to use the controls," Yuki said, laughing at herself a little. "I don't know the science behind it all." "That's completely fair," Amara said, in a very serious tone. "Most people don't need to know it." After dinner was served and all the plates and cups were collected, the cabin lights went dim. The man in 12D was deeply asleep. Most of the passengers around Amara settled in for the long overnight crossing over the Atlantic Ocean. People pulled blankets over themselves, put on eye covers, and leaned their seats back as far as the economy seats would allow. Amara stayed awake. She read things on her phone. She watched a program about aviation history on the small screen in front of her seat. She wrote more notes in her notebook. She looked out the window at the total and complete darkness above the ocean far below and thought about what was under them, 39,000 feet of freezing cold air, and then freezing cold water. At 1:47 in the morning Eastern Time, 6 hours and 42 minutes after the flight had taken off, Amara was reading an article on her phone about a new Boeing plane being developed when the woman in seat 12B, who had been sleeping quietly in the seat right beside her, suddenly slumped sideways without any warning. Amara looked up immediately. The woman's head had fallen onto the armrest between their seats. She was making no sound at all. She fell into a very deep sleep, Amara thought to herself. That sometimes happens on very long flights. Then the man in seat 12E, directly across the aisle from her, let out one short breath and his head dropped forward and rested on his chest. Amara looked slowly around the cabin. Every single person she could see in the dim lighting of the cabin was slumped over. Not sleeping in the normal way people sleep on planes, with small movements, occasional shifting around, turning their heads. Completely and totally still. Oddly, unnaturally, disturbingly still. She unbuckled her seatbelt and stood up. She walked forward a few rows up the aisle. She put her hand on the shoulder of a man sitting in seat 11A and shook him. He did not respond at all. She shook him harder. Still nothing. She leaned over and looked closely at his face. He was breathing, slow, steady, even breaths, but he was not simply asleep. He was unconscious in a way that was clearly and completely different from normal sleep. His eyes were perfectly still under their closed lids. His hands were hanging totally limp and loose. She walked back down the aisle, looking at face after face. 10 people. 20 people. 30. All unconscious. All breathing, but completely and totally unreachable. A cold fear began to rise up inside her chest, a heavy pressure that wanted to come out as a scream. She swallowed it back down hard. Think, she told herself firmly. Think the same way you think when you are trying to solve a difficult problem. You have information available to you. Use it. She walked quickly toward the small crew kitchen area at the very front of the upper floor. Yuki Tanaka was standing in the crew kitchen area with both of her hands pressed flat on the counter in front of her, breathing way too fast. Tears were running freely down her face. She was shaking so badly she could barely keep herself standing. When she heard footsteps coming toward her and looked up to see someone approaching, she made a broken sound of relief, but that relief immediately fell apart when she saw that it was just a teenage girl coming toward her. "Who are you?" Yuki whispered. Are you awake?" "I'm awake," Amara said. Her voice came out steadier than she expected it would. "My name is Amara. I'm 16 years old. I was sitting in seat 12C. I heard your announcement over the speakers. Everyone is unconscious," Yuki said, and her voice completely broke on those last words. "I walked to the front of the plane to check on something and both pilots, Captain Fletcher and First Officer Kapoor, they are both just slumped in their seats. I could not wake them up. I tried everything. I shook them, I shouted right in their ears, they simply will not wake up. And then I came back out and all the passengers were." "How long ago did they become unconscious?" Amara asked. "I don't know exactly. I was back here in the kitchen for about 30 minutes before I went to check the front. It might have been even longer before that." Amara's mind was already moving fast, putting pieces of information together. Something in the air inside the plane. Something that had affected nearly everyone who was breathing it but had not affected both of them. Most likely some kind of chemical, something that was affecting people's brains and making them lose consciousness. The plane's air system worked by constantly taking in fresh air from outside and mixing it with air that was already inside the cabin, while also carefully controlling the air pressure and the temperature and the amount of moisture in the air. If something harmful had gotten into that system at some point. "There is something in the air," Amara said in a calm, clear voice. "Something that is causing people to lose consciousness. You and I are not being affected by it, which tells me that our bodies are breaking down this chemical differently from how most other people's bodies break it down. For some reason connected to our individual body chemistry, we are processing it in a way that keeps it from reaching our brains. But whatever the reason is, right now we are the only two people who are awake on this entire plane." Yuki stared at her with wide eyes. "You're 16 years old." "Yes, I am. And I have been studying how planes work since I was 8 years old. I know what I'm talking about." Amara looked at her steadily and calmly. "Yuki. I need you to take me to the front of the plane right now. I need to see all the screens and controls." Captain James Fletcher was 52 years old and had 52 years of life experience behind him, including 24,000 hours of flying planes. He had flown in 6 continents. He had dealt with engines failing, birds flying into the plane, people having medical emergencies on board, and every kind of dangerous weather that the sky could possibly throw at an aircraft. He was a large man with gray beginning to show at his temples, and he carried himself with the calm, careful manner of someone who had long ago made his peace with the fact that his job sometimes put him very close to very serious danger. He was slumped over in the left seat at the very front of the plane, completely and totally unconscious, his hands hanging limp and loose in his lap. First Officer Priya Kapoor was sitting in the right seat beside him. She was 34 years old, had 8,000 hours of flying experience, was sharp and highly capable, and was just as completely unconscious as the captain. The front room of the plane where the pilot sat was an extraordinary place. It was shaped like a half circle and was filled with screens, panels, buttons, switches, and measuring instruments, all lit up in soft shades of blue, green, and white. Every single instrument was displaying information about the plane's condition in real time. The computer system that was controlling the flight was keeping the plane on its planned path across the Atlantic Ocean toward New York. All 4 engines were running in perfect condition. The plane was flying itself at 39,000 feet above the ocean with absolutely nobody conscious and aware to watch over it. Amara stepped through the door into the cockpit and stopped where she was. She had studied this cockpit before today. She had looked at dozens of photographs and watched many videos of it. She knew what each screen was showing and what each panel controlled. She knew where the radio controls were located, where the controls for the autopilot system were, where the fuel information was being displayed. But standing here in real life, in the dark, with 2 unconscious pilots in front of her and 489 unconscious passengers behind her and 39,000 feet of black sky below her. This was completely and totally different from anything she had ever looked at in a photo or a video or a manual. She stood in place for exactly 3 seconds. Then something shifted inside her mind. Not on purpose. Not something she chose or decided. It was simply the thing that happened inside her when a situation became bad enough, a quieting down, a sharpening up, a sudden clean and clear sense of exactly what needed to be done and in exactly what order it needed to happen. She sat down in the small extra seat that was positioned behind the main panel in the middle. She did not sit in either of the pilot seats. She did not touch any of the controls. She just looked at everything carefully. For a long moment she simply breathed slowly and let her eyes move carefully and completely across the entire panel that stretched out in front of her. She had seen this cockpit in hundreds of photos and videos over the years. She had studied its diagrams and layouts for many hours. But seeing it in real life was genuinely different from all of that. It was bigger than she had imagined it would be, and it felt alive in a way that no photo or video could capture. Every screen was lit up and active. Every system was running and sending back information. Numbers were changing in very small steps as the plane moved through the air. The main screen positioned in front of the captain's empty seat showed a steady straight line, blue above it and brown below it, telling her that the plane was flying completely level. The map screen beside it showed the planned flight path as a white curved line going across a dark background, with the plane's current position marked by a small green shape that was slowly and steadily moving forward over the middle of the dark Atlantic Ocean. The engine information displayed on the center screen showed all 4 engines working well, fuel being used at a steady normal rate, temperatures all within normal ranges. The autopilot system showed steady green lights across its panel. The plane was flying itself with complete and total precision, not knowing and not caring that there was nobody awake and aware to watch over it. Amara also noticed something else on one of the smaller screens. It showed the temperature of the air directly outside the plane, -56 degrees. That was the temperature of the air just a few centimeters beyond the thin metal walls surrounding those 489 sleeping people. Between those passengers and that deadly cold temperature was nothing but a thin layer of metal and the plane's air pressure system, the same air system that the harmful chemical had come from. She noted this fact in her mind and kept moving forward. The map screen confirmed the plane's position, the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, still following the planned path toward New York. The fuel screen showed that there was about 6 hours and 20 minutes of fuel remaining at the current rate the engines were burning through it. The autopilot showed all green lights, active and stable and working perfectly. She looked at the clock on the panel. 1:52 in the morning. She had been awake through the entire flight so far. Her body was starting to tell her about it, a slight heaviness sitting behind her eyes, a small stiffness in her back from sitting in an economy class seat for hours. She pushed the tiredness aside the way you push a door firmly closed when you don't want it to open. It would have to wait. Yuki was standing just inside the cockpit doorway, not coming any further into the room, as if walking deeper into the cockpit would make everything that was happening feel more real than she could currently handle. Her breathing had slowed down from the very fast panicked breathing she had been doing in the kitchen, but her face was still pale and her hands were pressed flat and hard against her legs, as if she needed to feel something solid and real under her hands. "Yuki," Amara said, without turning away from the screens in front of her. "Come and stand right next to me. I need you to be able to see clearly what I am doing. You might need to help me at some point later on." Yuki moved forward slowly and stood beside the small seat Amara was sitting in. "The plane is stable right now. The autopilot is turned on and working. It will keep the plane flying at the right height and in the right direction all by itself. We have about 6 hours and 20 minutes of fuel left before the engines will stop. Can we land it?" Yuki asked. "Not on our own. Not without help from someone who knows this plane." Amara was already looking carefully at the radio controls on the panel. "The first thing we need to do is get someone on the ground talking to us. Air traffic control. If we can get experienced help from people on the ground who know this plane, then we have real options. She looked carefully at the radio controls. She had seen them in manuals and videos many times before this moment. She knew which radio signal and which numbers to use when a plane was flying over the ocean. She reached up carefully, set the right signal frequency using the selector on the panel, and picked up the small hand microphone. She had listened to hundreds of hours of recordings of real cockpit conversations over the years. She knew exactly what an emergency call was supposed to sound like. She pressed the button on the microphone to begin transmitting. Mayday, Mayday, Mayday. This is Emirates Flight 616 calling Shanwick Control. We have an extreme emergency on board. Both pilots and all passengers except 2 people are unconscious. I am repeating, both pilots are unconscious right now. This is not a practice call or a test. Please respond immediately. She let go of the button. There was only the sound of static coming back. She tried again. Exactly the same words, spoken carefully and clearly. And then a voice came through the radio, professional and controlled, but carrying behind it the clear edge of someone who had just heard something that they had absolutely not expected to hear. Emirates 616, this is Shanwick Control. We received your transmission. Please confirm for us, did you say that both pilots are unconscious? That is confirmed, Amara said. Both pilots are unconscious. I am a passenger on this flight. I am 16 years old. I am sitting in the cockpit right now. The plane is flying itself on autopilot. I need help immediately. A pause came through the radio. About 4 seconds long. Then, Emirates 616, please stand by. We are getting emergency help started right now on our end. Please do not touch any of the controls. We will be back with you in 2 minutes. Amara set the microphone down carefully on the panel and breathed slowly and deeply. They believed you? Yuki asked quietly from behind her. They will check what I told them. But yes, they will respond. This is exactly the kind of situation that emergency plans exist for. Amara looked at the fuel reading on the screen one more time. 6 hours and 17 minutes remaining. We have time. Not a lot of it. But enough, if we use every minute of it the right way. While they waited for the air traffic controllers to come back with a plan, Amara worked. She was not the kind of person who sat and waited when something could still be tried. Whatever was making the passengers unconscious was in the air. The plane's air system brought in fresh outside air and mixed it with cabin air while controlling pressure, temperature, and moisture. If something harmful had entered that system, maybe she could change the cabin air enough to help people wake up. She asked Yuki to check both floors and confirm all passengers were still breathing. Yuki came back and confirmed they were. Whatever the chemical was, it was causing deep sleep, not stopping breathing. At least not yet. Over the next 3 hours, Amara tried several different things using the controls that were available to her from inside the cockpit and from the crew control panels built into the cabin walls. First, she adjusted the air pressure settings for the cabin, making the air slightly richer in oxygen than normal. She waited 30 minutes and then walked through the cabin and checked the passengers closest to her. No change at all. Then she turned on the emergency oxygen system, the system that makes the small yellow oxygen masks drop down from above each passenger seat when there is an emergency. She walked through the cabin and carefully placed the masks over the faces of the passengers who were closest to her. She waited 45 minutes. Still absolutely no change. Then she changed the settings on the air system to bring in as much fresh outside air as possible while cutting down as much as she could on the amount of cabin air being recycled and pumped back in. She was hoping this would make the concentration of the harmful chemical in the air thin out and reduce. After waiting 1 full hour, she walked through and checked the nearest passengers again. Still completely and totally unconscious. None of it worked. Not a single thing she had tried had made any difference at all. She went back to the cockpit and sat down in the small seat and thought. She could not solve the chemical problem by using the controls that were available to her. The chemical had already entered people's bodies through the air they had been breathing for hours and hours. Changing what was in the cabin air right now would not and could not undo what had already happened inside their bodies. They needed an actual medical solution that could work on what was already in their blood, and there was no such thing available to her at 39,000 feet above the middle of the ocean. Which meant there was only one option remaining. She had to bring the plane down to the ground herself. The air traffic control team she had first called over the radio had very quickly handed communication with her over to Shannon Control, which was based in Ireland. Shannon was much closer than New York was. Shannon had a runway that was long enough to handle a plane the size of the A380. Shannon was the airport they decided would be where the plane would come down. The controller she had been talking with was a man named Brendan O'Malley. He was 46 years old and had been working in air traffic control for 22 years. He had a large and steady voice with an Irish accent that somehow made even the most urgent instructions sound calming and manageable. In 22 years of working this job he had heard many strange and frightening things come through his headset. He had never heard anything remotely like this before. When Amara spoke to him clearly and honestly, "I need to be straight with you, Mr. O'Malley. There is a real chance that I am going to need to try to bring this plane down myself. I have never actually flown a plane before in my life. But I have spent years studying very carefully how the A380 works, using manuals and videos that I found on the internet. My first choice is to try everything possible to wake the pilots up. But if I cannot do that, I am going to need someone experienced to guide me through a landing step by step. I understand that what I am asking for is extremely difficult and unusual. I am still asking for it." He was completely quiet for nearly 10 full seconds. Then he said, "All right, Amara. Let's take this one step at a time. Let's first try everything we can to wake up the crew and keep the plane on its current path. I am pulling resources together on my end right now." Those resources turned out to include a retired Emirates captain named Thomas Wright. Thomas Wright was 64 years old. He had flown planes for Emirates for 22 years before he retired. In his career he had accumulated 31,000 hours of flying time on Airbus planes, including the A380. After retiring from flying, he had become a teacher at the Emirates Flight Training Center in Dubai, where he used flight simulators, special machines that feel and respond exactly like a real cockpit, to teach new pilots how to fly. By complete and fortunate coincidence, he happened to be in Shannon, Ireland at this particular time, visiting his daughter and her family. Within 40 minutes of Brendan O'Malley's emergency call going up through the system to the people who needed to know, Thomas Wright was sitting inside the Shannon control building with a headset on his ears and Amara's voice coming through it. His very first words to her were, "Amara, my name is Thomas Wright. I am a retired Emirates captain. I flew the A380 for 15 years of my career. I am here right now and I am going to help you through this. First I want to ask, how are you doing?" Amara's voice coming back through the radio was steady and precise, "I am scared. But I am thinking clearly and I am functional. The plane is stable and the autopilot is keeping it on course. I have tried several different ways to wake up the passengers and both pilots. Nothing has worked at all. I think we need to move forward with bringing the plane down to land. I have about 3 hours of fuel remaining at this point. Shannon is the airport we are being directed toward." "That is correct," Wright said. "Shannon. I know that airport very well. We are going to walk you through this entire process one step at a time. But first, before we do anything else, I want to ask you some questions to understand what you already know." What followed was a 15-minute conversation during which Wright carefully tested what Amara knew about the plane, asking her questions about the flight computer, about the different modes the autopilot could work in, about the system that guides a plane down to a runway using radio signals from the ground, about how the landing gear worked, about how the automatic braking system functioned. Amara answered every single question correctly and completely. Wright said later that based on her answers, her knowledge of the A380 was equal to someone who had already completed more than half of the many months of training that a professional pilot has to go through before they are allowed to fly this aircraft. She knew things I would not expect a professional pilot to know unless they had spent serious time with the manuals, he said later. She was not guessing. She was remembering. After finishing his assessment of what she knew, Wright made his decision. Amara, I believe that you can do this. It is going to be genuinely hard and there will be moments that feel overwhelming. But the autopilot will do the largest and most complex part of the work until we get very close to the runway. At that point, we are going to work through the approach and the actual landing together, one step at a time. I will tell you exactly what button or control to use, what to check on your screens, and what you should expect to happen. You tell me clearly and exactly what your screens are showing you at every step. Understood? Understood, Amara said. Then after a brief pause she added, very quietly, Mr. Wright. I need you to be completely honest with me. How hard is what we are about to try to do? Wright was silent for a moment before answering. Completely honestly. Professional pilots go through many months of very intensive training before they are considered qualified to fly this particular aircraft. What we are asking you to attempt is at an extremely advanced level. But you have the autopilot working in your favor, you have the ground-based radio guidance system that will help pull the plane toward the runway, you have the automatic braking system, and most importantly you have me talking you through every single step. A brief pause. It is hard. But I believe you can do it. Okay, Amara said. Then, let's start. The next 2 hours were the most focused, most intense, and most demanding 2 hours of Amara Desta's entire life, and she had already had some genuinely demanding hours in her 16 years. Wright guided her through the preparation for landing in a very careful and methodical way. She had to enter specific information into the flight computer to tell the plane exactly how to approach Shannon Airport, entering the code for the specific runway they would be landing on. Tuning into the correct radio signal coming up from the ground that would guide the plane down the right path to the runway, and checking that all the approach settings and the correct angle of descent were properly entered. Wright walked her through each individual step of this process, explained what each screen was displaying and what it meant, and told her exactly what each number she was looking at represented. Amara completed each step carefully and then reported back to Wright with precise detail about exactly what she was seeing on the screens in front of her. She did not rush ahead. She did not skip any step. She never assumed that she had done something correctly, she confirmed every single step with Wright before moving on to the next one. At one point during the preparation she made an error entering one of the numbers into the flight computer. She caught the mistake herself before Wright had even noticed that something was wrong. I entered the wrong number for the descent angle, she said immediately. I am fixing it right now. Tell me what you entered and what the correct number is, Wright said. She told him both numbers. He confirmed that her correction was right. He did not say not to worry about it or try to reassure her. He simply said, "Good catch. Keep going." Yuki stayed inside the cockpit for most of this entire process, sitting quietly in the corner near the door, not speaking, keeping completely out of the way. At one point she slipped out briefly and came back with a bottle of water and a small packet of crackers from the kitchen for Amara. Amara took them without once looking away from the screens, ate the crackers without really tasting them, and kept working. The plane was descending now, following the path that had been entered into the flight computer that would lead it down toward Shannon Airport. The autopilot and the system that automatically controlled the engines were managing the plane's height and speed on their own without any input from Amara. The radio signal coming up from the runway at Shannon Airport was actively guiding the plane, pulling it toward the correct left-right position over the runway's center line and down the correct angle of approach. Amara's job, as Wright had explained it to her, was to watch everything carefully, to verify that all the readings matched what Wright told her they should be, and at the single most critical moment of the entire process, to physically take control of the plane and guide it through the final landing. With about 2 hours remaining before they would reach the airport, Wright said to her, "Amara, I need to talk to you now about what the actual landing itself is going to involve. The autopilot is going to fly you down the approach path all the way to 100 feet above the runway. At that point, you are going to have to take manual control. This is the hardest part of everything we are doing. I understand, Amara said. You are going to take hold of the control stick, the small stick located on the left side of the cockpit in front of the captain's seat. You are going to pull it back toward you, gently, just slightly. This will cause the nose of the plane to come up a small amount. When the nose comes up, the plane will stop descending as fast, and this will allow the wheels to come down and make contact with the runway in a controlled way rather than slamming into it. You must not pull too hard or too far back. If you pull too much, the very back of the plane could touch the ground instead of the wheels, which would be very dangerous. The movement needs to be small. How small is small enough without being too small? Amara asked. I am going to count you through it in real time when we reach that moment. Follow my count and my instructions, do not follow what your own body instinct is telling you to do. Your instinct at that moment is going to be screaming at you to pull hard and fast because the ground is going to be coming up at you very quickly. You must ignore that instinct. The movement is small and it is controlled. Small and controlled, Amara repeated. I will remember that. After the wheels touch the runway, I will tell you exactly when and how to activate the reverse engine power and how to manage the brakes. The automatic braking system will engage and help slow the plane. Your main job after the wheels are on the ground is to keep the plane traveling in a straight line directly down the center of the runway. I use the foot pedals to keep it straight. Wright paused briefly. Yes. You know about the foot pedals. I have watched the full landing procedure in cockpit videos many times. Good. Yes. Foot pedals for directional control. Small inputs only. The plane responds well and quickly to small inputs on those pedals. The final hour before reaching Shannon Airport was the single most complex and demanding hour of the entire crisis. As the A380 descended through the layer of clouds and dropped lower toward the dark Irish coastline below, Amara was tracking and managing more pieces of information at the same time than she had ever had to manage in her life. The speed of the plane. The height above the ground. How quickly the plane was descending. Whether the plane was lined up correctly from left to right over the runway. Whether the plane was coming down at the correct angle. The condition of all four engines. How much fuel was remaining. The position of the wing flaps, panels on the wings that change shape to help control the plane at low speeds. The landing gear. Wright called out checkpoint steadily, exactly the way a real co-pilot sitting beside the captain would do. Outer marker, your height should be 2,400 feet and you should be going down. I am at 2,380 feet and going down. Good. Set the wing flaps to their maximum position, all the way, the very last setting on the control. Wing flaps moving to maximum. Confirmed at maximum. Landing gear, put it down now. Landing gear going down. 3 green lights now showing. 3 green lights meant that all 3 sets of the plane's wheels had extended fully and locked into position ready for landing. Automatic brakes, set them to the highest setting. Automatic brakes set to highest setting. Confirmed. She was below the clouds now and could see clearly through the front window of the cockpit. 2 long rows of bright approach lights stretched out ahead of her in the darkness, pointing directly at the runway. The runway itself was lit up with bright white lights. Shannon Airport. She could see it clearly. It was real and solid and it was getting closer by the second and it was the only thing that existed in the entire world at this moment. Her hands were shaking. Not her mind. Her hands. Her mind was completely and totally still and clear. For one brief moment, she thought about the 8-year-old girl who had stood in front of that old retired military plane at the museum by the Hudson River in New York and felt something she had not had the words to describe. A pulling feeling toward these machines, a deep sense that they were the most important and most wonderful things that human beings had ever built. She had chased that feeling every single day for 8 years. She had read manuals and watched videos and built model engines and entered every competition she could find and stayed in the school engineering room long after everyone else had gone home and dreamed about planes the way some people dream about becoming famous or becoming rich. She had done all of that because she loved it. Not because she ever imagined she would end up here. Not because she had planned for this specific moment in any way. But she was here. And everything she had studied and learned and remembered was real, and it was in her mind, and it was available to her whether she had planned for this moment or not. Amara. 1,000 feet above the ground. Your path looks correct. How are you doing right now? I am okay. I can see the runway clearly. Good. At 100 feet I will give you the word. You will take the control stick and pull it back toward you. Gently. Small movement. I will count you through it. Small movement, she said. I remember. 500 feet. The runway was filling up more and more of the front window with every passing second. This was real. There were 489 people behind her in their seats. Her grandmother had said a prayer for her every single morning since the day she was born into this world. Her mother had worked 2 jobs for 3 years and said no to things she wanted so that she could save enough money to send her daughter to visit family in Ethiopia. Her school had kept the engineering room unlocked and open for her after hours because the teachers there had seen something special in her and wanted to give it room to grow. None of those people, not one of them, had imagined that it might one day come to a moment like this one. 200 feet. 150 feet. Amara. Take the control stick now. She reached her left hand out and took hold of it. It was smaller than she had pictured it would be. It responded to even very light pressure from her hand. She could feel the plane through it, a faint but real sense of something alive, tiny automatic adjustments being made constantly as the autopilot did its final work. The whole enormous machine was somehow communicating with her through this one small point of contact between her hand and the stick. She had read descriptions of what it felt like to hold the control stick of a large passenger aircraft. Those descriptions had not been wrong. But they had not been complete either. It felt like holding something living that needed to be treated with care and respect. Do not hold it too tight, Wright said through the radio, as if he could somehow sense exactly what she was doing with her hand. Hold it firmly so it doesn't move on its own, but don't squeeze hard. Let the plane tell you things through it. I can feel it, she said quietly. 100 feet above the ground. Now, Wright said, his voice completely calm and steady. Pull back. Gently. 3. 2. 1. Now. She pulled. The nose of the plane came up. The rate at which the plane was dropping toward the ground slowed. The engines, Wright had told her to keep a small amount of power going to them right until the moment of touchdown, kept the plane from falling too fast toward the runway. The wheels hit the runway. Hard, harder than a normal smooth professional landing would be, as she learned later, but completely within the safe range of what the landing gear and the plane structure could handle without damage. The plane shook heavily with the impact and the tires made a loud screaming sound as they made contact with the runway surface, and the automatic brakes grabbed firmly and strongly, and Amara held the control stick steady in her left hand and kept her eyes fixed on the white center line of the runway stretching ahead of her, and she pressed her left foot pedal once when the plane drifted a small distance to the right and it came back to center, and they were rolling very fast but getting slower, the engines working in reverse to push back against the forward momentum and slow the plane, and then slower still, and then much slower, and then slow, and then completely stopped. Emirates Flight 616. On the ground. Shannon Airport, Ireland. 3:24 in the morning. Amara sat in the captain's seat. She had moved into it during the final approach because she needed to be able to reach the control stick from that position, and she looked through the front window at the runway lights stretching away in front of her and the dark Irish sky and countryside beyond them. She did not say a single word for almost a full minute. Behind her, Yuki made a sound that was not quite any word in any language. It was simply the sound a human being makes when something they were completely and totally certain was going to end in disaster turns out not to. It was relief and disbelief and exhaustion all in one single long slow breath. Amara looked at the instrument screens one more time. All 4 engines still running. Fuel remaining in the tanks. All systems reading normal. The plane had done everything it was built and designed to do. She had done what she needed to do. She reached forward and picked up the microphone. "Shannon Control," she said. Her voice was quiet and even. "This is Emirates 616. We are on the ground. All passengers are breathing. I believe everyone is going to be okay." Brendan O'Malley's voice came back through the radio, and it was no longer the voice of a professional controller doing his job in a controlled and detached way. It was the voice of a grown man who had just watched something happen that he was going to carry with him for the rest of his life. "Emirates 616, he said. "Amara Desta, age 16, you just did something that experienced professional pilots would say is not possible. You saved 489 lives using nothing but determination and the best memory for systems you have never once touched before tonight. You are a pilot now. Welcome to aviation." The emergency vehicles reached the plane within 4 minutes of it coming to a complete stop on the runway. Ambulances, fire trucks, full medical teams, and airport security all came. Shannon Airport had been placed on the highest level of emergency alert and had every single available resource standing by and ready for the past 2 hours. The medical teams came on board the plane and found 489 people unconscious but all breathing. The cause of what had happened was identified quite quickly once they began testing. A strong industrial cleaning chemical, the kind used in factories and workshops, not approved or safe for use anywhere near aircraft or aircraft systems, had been mistakenly used by a maintenance worker at Dubai Airport 3 days earlier while doing routine maintenance work on the plane. The chemical had slowly been releasing into the cabin air throughout the flight. At the height the plane had been flying, the specific combination of air pressure levels and moisture levels and oxygen concentration had made the chemical strong enough to act exactly like a powerful sleeping drug on the human brain and nervous system of anyone who breathed it for long enough. Most people on board, after breathing the contaminated air for long enough, lost consciousness at around 6.5 hours into the flight. Amara and Yuki were both protected from this effect by an unusual feature in the way their individual bodies processed certain chemicals. Their bodies broke down this particular compound before it could travel through their blood and reach their brains. When the doors of the plane were opened and fresh clean outside air began flooding into the cabin, the chemical began clearing rapidly from people's bodies. Within about 40 minutes, passengers began waking up. Captain James Fletcher woke up on a medical stretcher inside the plane. A member of the medical team told him a brief version of what had happened while he was unconscious. He did not believe it. One of the investigators showed him a recording that had been made automatically by the equipment inside the cockpit during the entire flight, the voice of a 16-year-old girl calmly and precisely working through every step of the landing process with Thomas Wright guiding her, asking exact and technically correct questions, catching and correcting her own mistake in the flight computer, and bringing a plane carrying 489 people down onto a runway in Ireland in the middle of the night. He watched and listened to the entire recording without saying anything. Then he set down the device it had been playing on and was quiet for a very long time. Later that morning he asked to meet her. She was sitting on the steps of one of the ambulances outside the plane, wrapped in a blanket that one of the medical staff had put around her shoulders, holding a cup of orange juice. She still had her Harvard hoodie on. Her notebook was open in her lap and she was writing in it. Fletcher walked over to her. She looked up when she heard his footsteps. "Captain Fletcher," she said immediately. "I am sorry about your plane. The landing was rougher than it should have been." He sat down on the steps next to her. He was quiet for a moment. "The landing was fine," he said. "The plane is fine. Every single person on board is fine." "Good," she said simply. He glanced down at the open notebook. "What are you writing?" "Notes," she said. I want to write down everything I observed and noticed about how the flight computer managed the approach while everything is still completely clear in my mind. And the feeling of the control stick at the moment of touchdown, I want to get that down in words while I can still feel it in my hand. I have read descriptions of it many times. The actual experience is different from any description. Fletcher looked at her steadily for a long moment. You are 16 years old, he said. Yes, sir. And you have been reading plane manuals since you were 8. Since I was 8. The A380 specifically since I was about 14 years old. Why? He asked. She thought about the question for a moment before answering. Most people did not ask her why. They just noted that she was unusual in some way and then moved on from it. Because planes are the most complex and the most beautiful machines that human beings have ever built, she said. Because the engineering that goes into them is truly extraordinary. Because the physics that keeps them in the air is real and clear and honest, it follows rules and those rules always work the same way. And because they carry people. They are not just machines, every single flight is hundreds of people placing their complete trust in the engineering. I want to understand the things that people trust their lives to. She paused for a moment. I want to make things like this better. Safer. That is what engineering is supposed to be for. Fletcher nodded slowly. What is your plan after you finish school? MIT, she said. I have been accepted to their summer program. Then hopefully a full degree in aerospace engineering. Then maybe working on designing planes. Or NASA. I have not fully decided yet. He was quiet again for a moment. Then he said, every pilot spends their entire career hoping that when a real emergency comes, they will be good enough to handle it. You had no training at all. No experience. No warning that any of this was coming. And you were not just good enough, you were exceptional. He paused. I have been flying planes for 30 years. I want to tell you something completely honest. What you did tonight, I genuinely am not certain that I could have done it if our situations had been reversed. If I had woken up as a passenger on this plane with no training and had to figure out the radio and the flight computer entirely from memory and then fly the approach and landing, he shook his head slowly. What you did was exceptional. Amara looked at him. I was scared the entire time, she said honestly. So is almost everyone in those situations, he said. The only thing that actually matters is what you do while you are scared. The news reporters found out what had happened within a few hours. By the morning, the story was being reported everywhere. Teen passenger lands A380 after crew loses consciousness. 489 survive. Photos of Shannon Airport with the Emirates plane sitting on the runway, surrounded by emergency vehicles, went around the world. The name Amara Desta appeared in headlines everywhere by noon. By that evening, her school photo taken from the Brooklyn Technical High School website was on the front pages of newspapers in 30 different countries. The reporters who managed to reach her wanted dramatic and emotional quotes. They wanted a big story about an unlikely hero saving the day. What they got instead was Amara, still wearing the Harvard hoodie, being careful and precise and honest and gently pushing back against the most dramatic versions of what had happened. I was not brave, she told one reporter directly. I was simply awake when everyone else was not. If any other person on that plane had been awake, they would have done something too. I just happened to have studied the right things at some point before this night. It was not heroism, it was preparation meeting a situation that needed it. When another reporter asked how she felt about being called a hero by the Irish air traffic controller, she said, Brendan O'Malley and Thomas Wright are the real story here. They did the genuinely hard work of teaching me what I needed to do in real time, under real pressure, with no preparation. I had the memory for the material that was already in my head. They had the experience and the judgment that I did not have. It was a team effort, and they carried most of the weight of it. When a third reporter asked what she wanted people to take away from what had happened, she was quiet for a moment before answering. Then she said, I think what it shows is that preparation matters more than most people realize. I studied planes my whole life because I love them, not because I was expecting an emergency to happen. I had no idea I would ever need any of it in a situation like this. But the preparation was there inside my head when I needed it. That is why you study things properly and completely, not because you know exactly when you will need what you have learned, but because you cannot know, and so you prepare anyway. MIT sent her a message within 24 hours of the story becoming public, a full scholarship offer, to begin whenever she was ready. Boeing reached out through her mother's phone with an offer of a paid internship. Emirates made a public announcement that Amara and her mother would be given free flights for the rest of their lives as a thank you for what she had done. Captain Fletcher wrote her a personal letter by hand on paper. She put it in a frame and hung it on her bedroom wall. Thomas Wright, speaking in an interview some days later, said, "I have trained a great many pilots on the A380 simulator over the years. Some of them were not as composed or as precise during approach and landing as she was during those final minutes. The calmness was remarkable. The knowledge was remarkable. But the thing I will honestly remember the most from that night is that she caught her own mistake in the flight computer before I did. That is not something a beginner does. That is what someone does when they genuinely understand the system they are working with." Brendan O'Malley said, "I have 2 daughters. When I came home that morning I told them the whole story. I said, that is what happens when you study hard and care deeply about what you do. You become necessary. That girl was necessary that night, and she was ready to be necessary. That is the whole story." 3 months after that night, Amara Desta arrived at MIT's main campus in the city of Cambridge in Massachusetts for the start of their summer aerospace engineering program. She carried the same backpack with the same colorful badges on it, though she had added one new one, a small green shamrock that she had bought at the Shannon Airport gift shop on the morning after the landing. She was still wearing the Harvard hoodie. It meant something slightly different to her now. She also carried the notebook. It had many new pages in it now, detailed notes about how the flight computer had managed the approach into Shannon, what the control stick had felt like in her hand during those final seconds, exactly what the runway lights had looked like when the plane was at 200 feet above the ground, the sound the tires made when they hit the runway surface, all the numbers she had been watching on the screens during the descent. She had written it all down within hours while every detail was still completely fresh in her memory, and she went back and read those pages sometimes when she wanted to remember what that night had truly felt like from the inside. She was the youngest in the program and the only one who had ever landed an A380. This was never mentioned officially. It was simply known. There was a quiet respectful awareness around it that she appreciated. On the very first day of the program, the lead professor, a woman named Dr. Chen who had spent 30 years designing large cargo aircraft, asked each student in turn to introduce themselves and explain what had led them to aerospace engineering. When it was Amara's turn, she said, "My name is Amara Desta. I am from Brooklyn, New York. I have been interested in planes and how they work since I was 8 years old. I want to study aerospace engineering because planes are the most complex and beautiful machines that human beings have ever built, and I want to understand them well enough to make them better and safer than they are today." She paused. "And also," she added, speaking quietly, "because earlier this year I found out in a very direct and very real way that understanding how a plane works is not something you do only in a classroom or only on paper. So I want to keep learning. There is always more to understand." Dr. Chen looked at her for a moment, then nodded once, and moved on to the next student without saying anything else. After the class ended, Dr. Chen found her standing in the hallway. "I know who you are," Dr. Chen said. "I know what you did back in March." "Yes," Amara said. "If you had to name just one thing, one single thing, that made the difference that night, what would it be?" Amara thought about the question carefully before answering. She thought about the 3 seconds of pure fear before her mind went quiet and clear and focused. She thought about reading the full A380 manual at 14 years old, all 847 pages of it over 3 evenings at the kitchen table. She thought about her mother putting money aside every month for 3 years so that her daughter could visit Ethiopia. She thought about Thomas Wright's calm steady voice counting her through the final seconds before touchdown and the feeling of the control stick under her left hand and the 2 rows of bright lights leading to the runway coming toward her through the dark. "I read the manual," she said finally. "I read it completely, from the first page to the last, and I remembered all of it. I think that really is the whole answer. Read the manual. All of it. Every page. And remember it." Dr. Chen smiled, a genuine and warm smile. "That is the best piece of engineering advice I have heard in 30 years of working in this field. Welcome to MIT, Amara." Amara Desta graduated from Brooklyn Technical High School the following June, finishing at the very top of her class. She went to MIT that fall on a full scholarship to study aerospace engineering. She spent every summer working, first with Boeing and then with NASA's Research Center in California, contributing to work on improving the air systems and safety backup systems in commercial aircraft. This work came directly from what she had experienced and learned on Emirates 616. The official investigation into what had happened on Emirates Flight 616 led to new international rules covering which cleaning and maintenance chemicals were allowed to be used anywhere near aircraft, and what level of training and certification any worker had to have before they were allowed to do maintenance work on commercial planes. Within the aviation industry, these new rules became quietly known as the 616 standards. Captain James Fletcher retired from flying 2 years after that night. At his retirement dinner, he said in his speech that in 30 years of flying he had carried one truly extraordinary passenger, and that she had paid him back in the greatest way he could imagine. Yuki Tanaka stayed on with Emirates. She completed an emergency first aid course that she had been planning to take for a long time. At the age of 30 she also began studying for her own private pilot license. She told people who asked that a 16-year-old girl had given her the motivation to finally do it. Brendan O'Malley worked 8 more years at Shannon Control before retiring. Throughout those 8 years he kept one photograph on his desk, not a photo of the plane or the runway or the emergency vehicles, but Amara's school photo that had appeared in the newspaper on the morning after the landing. When anyone who visited his desk asked who it was in the photo, he always said the same thing: "The most prepared person I have ever worked with in my entire career." And she was still in high school when it happened. Thomas Wright wrote a short paper, not published in any official journal, just passed around informally among other flight simulator teachers, about what Amara's performance that night suggested about the relationship between deep book knowledge and real practical ability under extreme pressure. His conclusion was that for students who were truly motivated and genuinely gifted, the distance between knowing something in theory and being able to actually do it in practice was much smaller than the professional aviation training world generally assumed it to be. The paper was quietly discussed and referred to among simulator teachers for many years after he wrote it. And Amara herself, working late one evening in the MIT engineering lab when she was 22 years old and finishing her research paper on the next generation of air pressure and air quality systems for commercial aircraft, was asked by a younger student sitting nearby what had led her to choose that specific and quite narrow area to focus her research on. She reached into her bag and pulled out a notebook, the same one, worn and soft now from years of being carried everywhere, its cover marked and stained from years of use, and set it on the desk between them. "I was 16, she said. I was on a flight. Something went very wrong with the plane's air system. And when that flight was over and everyone was safe, I made a decision, that I was going to understand that system well enough that what happened on that flight could never happen to anyone else the same way again." She opened the notebook and found an early page, written on the night of March 11, 2016, that read, "First time on A380. 2 floors, amazing. The wing looks much bigger from this angle than I expected. I wonder how high this plane can actually fly." Below it, further down the same page but written in slightly shakier handwriting that was clearly from much later the same night, height 1,000 feet above ground. Path centered correctly. Automatic brake set. Landing gear down, 3 green lights confirmed. The control stick at the moment of touchdown felt lighter and more sensitive than any description I had read prepared me for. Small movement really does mean small. Remember that always. She turned to the next page. Now, she said to the younger student beside her, let me show you what I have found.